was called the world's first pregnant man, and today he gave birth.
But the court has gone the whole way, said there is an absolute constitutional right to same-sex marriage.
Hurricane Harvey is pelting the Texas coastline.
There is an increasing attack on freedom of religion, speech, and conscience.
Welcome to the Issachar Hour, examining law, policy, and culture through the lens of the Judeo-Christian worldview to help you understand the times and know what you ought to do.
Good day, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Issachar Hour on MTM TV, the TBN of the Caribbean, but actually going to the world. Well, we are in the midst of it. We are in the midst of all sorts of considerations about race. So today we are going to talk about race. What is it? What does the Bible say about race? And also what science says about race. But you want to open in a...
Right.
So this is my wife, Doreen.
I'm Doreen West.
Yeah.
And
I didn't tell you who I was there. My name is Wayne, and that's Doreen.
So hello to all our listeners and viewing audience. Welcome to the Issachar Hour. So as we're talking about race, what it is, biblical perspective, just to show you that racial things have been going on for a long time. It is not a modern thing, this issue of race. I'm reading from Numbers 12. And Numbers is one of the early books in the Bible, what you call the Pentateuch. And in the book of Numbers, we know that Moses led the people out of Egypt. And Moses had a brother named Aaron, who was going to be the high priest, and Miriam was Moses' sister. In fact, Miriam was the one who went to the river when Moses was in the basket and got Pharaoh's daughter to take Moses, to adopt Moses, and his own mother to breastfeed him. Yeah. Miriam did that.
Yeah, so Miriam.
So she saved his life in a way, right?
Well, yes,
because she got his own mother to breastfeed him.
Yeah, she was part of the mother's scheme.
She was part of the whole scheme to save Moses' life when Pharaoh wanted to kill all the boys. So, however, Numbers 12 tells us something interesting. Numbers 12 says Miriam, the sister, and Aaron rebelled against Moses. Why? On account of the Cushite woman that he had married. Cushite was a black person. Cushites are black people. So Moses married a Cushite woman, a black woman, and they rebelled against him. And they asked, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Hasn't he also spoken through us? But the Lord heard it. Now Moses was very humble. He was the most humble man on earth. So all of a sudden the Lord told Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, the three of you, come out to the tent of meeting. So God called a little convocation.
A tete-a-tete, heart-to-heart talk.
So the three of them went out, and God came down in a pillar of cloud. He stood at the entrance to the tent of meeting, and he summoned Aaron and Miriam. So the two of them went forward. This is high drama.
Yeah, I love the way the Lord operates. He has a lot of personality. When you check
come
on
to the tent of meeting. It's all they want to rebel against.
Come and let us reason about this thing.
And he said, you two, you come.
Yeah,
and the two of them went. And he said, pay attention to what I have to say.
Yeah.
When there's a prophet among you, won't I, the Lord, and the Lord is in all capitals, meaning Yahweh, reveal myself to him in a vision? Won't I speak with him in a dream? But that's not how it is with my servant Moses. He has been entrusted with my entire household. I speak to him audibly and in visions, not mysteries. If he can gaze at the image of the Lord, why aren't you afraid to speak against him?
Moses was a high man.
He wasn't just a prophet.
Yeah, he said
that he gives mysteries to and so on. He said he talks to him directly. Right? And he says, since this is so, since it's a man who has gazed on the image of Yahweh, how it is that you are not afraid to speak against him?
Like I said, I love God's personality. You go through the Bible and look at God's personality. He had a lot of fight.
So the Lord was very angry with them, and he left. Yeah,
didn't say anything.
Rage. But when the cloud ascended from the tent, Miriam had become a leper, as white as snow. And Aaron begged Moses, don't hold this sin against us because we have acted foolishly and sinned in doing so.
A lot of things in that story.
A lot of things
in that story. Go ahead. But, the Lord went on to say, he said, if Miriam's father had spit in her face, she would have been embarrassed. That's all. So let her go outside of the camp for a couple of days.
Yeah, she had to be outside of the camp.
But what I like, what I
she
find,
has to be in isolation for 7 days, and then she could be brought in.
Like I say, what I like is go to the Bible and check God's personality. He has a tremendous personality. And the phrases that he uses sometimes, he said, if her father had spit in her face. Now, many Christians nowadays would say, how could God say such a thing? Because the God that they talk about is a God who wouldn't step on anything. He said, if her father, Miriam's father, had spit in her face, she would have been embarrassed. So let her go outside of the camp, and in 7 days' time, she'll be sorted out. That's power under control, with personality to go with it.
And so God was very, very angry with Miriam. Interestingly, only Miriam became leprous. Both of them had rebelled against Moses.
Well, remember, Aaron was the chief priest.
So he couldn't go into isolation for 7 days.
That's right, and God wouldn't contaminate his high priest. Not because Aaron was
because
good,
of the office.
but because of the office.
Right. So Miriam got the leprosy in God's anger at talking against Moses because Moses had married a black woman.
So God was saying that Moses marrying the black woman is all good.
It's all good. And you better leave him alone.
It is a statement about race. God is making a statement about race there.
It's a statement about God and a statement about race.
It's a statement about marriage too.
It's a statement about everything. Moses married a black woman. Yeah. Moses is God's man.
Yeah.
You leave him alone.
And that interracial, even then, God was saying interracial marriage is okay.
God has never been against interracial marriage.
So when the white people in America put up all those barriers, they were going against what God has established.
They were turning the Bible upside down to suit their
purposes. As people always do.
They want to start with that.
So we're talking today about what the Bible says about race and also what science says about race. So where are we going to start?
Well, I think we should start with science, you know. Because a lot of terms that people may hear being used, they might need some explanation for our listeners. So, for example, you hear about genes. People have genes, not denim, genes, Genes, that carry whatever the traits you inherit.
And the denim, how you spell denim gene? Is
Geans.
Okay, like the name gene.
Right.
And
these
genes
are
is
Genes.
Yeah. So when we say gene from now on, we're not talking about anybody, no friend of yours or anything.
Talking about genes. Genes are the carriers of the traits that you inherit. So we want to give a little explanation about genes, and you'll hear another word called alleles. Alleles are what describe the feature, the form that gene takes. Okay, so let's look at the first video that talks about genes, which are the DNA that carries your traits, and the alleles to show the alleles are what form that those genes take. So let's look at the first video, which is a short video showing the difference between those two terms, genes and alleles, because you'll hear those words as we go along in the science of race.
Okay, let's take a look at that.
Thanks for stopping by. Today we're going to talk about the difference between genes and alleles. Let's start with genes. Genes are sections of DNA which code for a specific trait. You have literally thousands of genes. You have genes for eye color, hand size, metabolism, cell structure, and every other piece of your body. It's not as simple as one gene for one trait, but most basic biology classes discuss it this way for simplicity. All right, let's move on to alleles. So alleles are different forms of the same gene. Think of it as a different flavor or variety. Let's use an analogy. If Coca-Cola were the gene, the alleles would be diet, classic, caffeine-free, vanilla, cherry, or whatever kind of Coke it is. All right, using the eye color gene, the alleles would be green, brown, gray, blue, hazel, just the different options for eye color. Just remember, the gene specifies which trait, and the allele specifies what form the gene takes. Okay, let me say that again. This is the bottom line. The gene specifies which trait, and the allele specifies what form the gene takes. All right, and that's it. Check out my other genetics videos, and if you have any questions, throw them in the comments. Thanks.
Okay, we just want to thank the person who produced that. They never said their name, but they have a little YouTube channel called 2-Minute Classroom. So if you want to go and see that again somewhere, just look up for 2-Minute Classroom, genes and alleles, because that's where they introduce the concept.
Right.
But it's not only genes and allele. What we need to find out
No, it's not
more.
just genes. And we said a gene is a material that carries a trait, right? From your parents.
And this is in your DNA.
This is in your DNA, in your chromosomes.
And the DNA makes up the chromosome.
The DNA makes up the chromosome. So you have chromosomes. We all have 23 pairs of chromosomes.
Yeah.
Well, one is a XY or XX, and then we have about 22 other pairs. The chromosomes are composites of genes.
Of genes, yeah.
And a gene, for example, gene carries a trait from your mother or your father. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like your blood group, whatever. Those are genes.
Yeah.
And then alleles are the forms that a gene may take.
Yeah, so a particular gene can take different forms.
Can take different alleles. And a form is called an allele.
So each form is called an allele.
So if there are two forms that gene can take, to make it simple. Suppose there's a gene for your hair or something, and it can take two forms. Those two forms will be called alleles.
Okay.
So a person might either get that allele of the gene or the other allele of the gene, or one of each from their mother and father, right? So.
And what do these alleles do? What is the significance of the alleles?
Well, they tell you what form the gene is going to take.
All right, but having told you what form is take, what is the significance of the different forms?
Right. So it depends on how they are inherited, which is what the next thing I'm going to go to. So alleles may be dominant or recessive.
In terms of the expression,
In terms of their expression.
Yeah.
So an allele is expressed.
Yeah.
And it may be expressed either in a dominant way or a recessive way. So dominant means that, you know what dominant means, it takes over.
Once it's there, it runs the show.
Yeah,
so the dominant gene is once it's present, it runs the show.
Right?
Yeah.
And whereas the recessive one is always subject to the dominant one. So if you have a dominant and a recessive, the dominant one is going to show up in what the body looks like, what the feature is, right?
But if you have the recessive, then they will show up.
If you have two copies of the recessive, it will show up. But never if there's a dominant. If there's a dominant along with the recessive, so let's say you have two forms of that allele, right?
Yeah.
And one is dominant, one is recessive. If they exist together, it is the dominant one that will show up in your looks.
The way you look.
In your looks. So suppose you have an allele, a gene for ear, for the size of your ears, to put it simply. And you have an allele that gives you big ears and an allele that gives you small ears of that gene for ears, right? Then if you have both the big ear and the small ear allele, you will have big ears.
Okay.
Whereas if you have no big ear allele at all and two copies of the small ear allele, you will have small ears.
Yeah, so that's how dominant
That's
and
how
recessive.
dominant recessive come in.
So
a recessive thing needs two copies of it to be expressed.
The interesting thing is that the alleles that you have is your genotype.
Yes.
But what you look like
is your
phenotype. And you
that's
can have
another difference.
You can have the same phenotype but with different genotypes.
Absolutely. So someone could have those different genotypes. Two people could have different genotypes but have the same phenotypes, which is very important when you come to talk further about race. So your genotype is what the genes that you have, or the alleles of the genes, the forms of the genes that you have. But your phenotype is what you look like.
You have to look like. So in other words, if you have, it's like I think in the videos we're going to be showing in a short while, if you have big B, you get whatever big B produces. Let us say it's blue eyes, as the case may be. So if you have big B, you could get blue eyes. But if you have big B, small b, you still have blue eyes.
Yeah, even if small b is for different color eyes, because it's recessive to the big one. And so the big one will always show up in your phenotype.
So in other words, the thing is, what you look like does not necessarily say what
your genes or your alleles are.
Alleles are.
That's true. You cannot look at phenotype and know for sure what your genotype or your alleles or your genes are.
So that's an important takeaway point, because one of the things we'll be showing you as we develop this discussion is that people often wonder, how could Adam and Eve, who would have probably looked a particular way and produce all the different types of people we see in the world, And it's quite, in fact, it is quite, if once you understand the science of it, you realize it's quite simple. It's quite an easy thing to, well, not easy, because with God, these things are not easy, but they are logical to achieve.
And also, we know that there are stories, for example, of this black couple in Nigeria, I think. Black people, and they had a blue-eyed, curly, blonde-haired child. And after they did all the testing, and the child was not a jacket, the child was really the man's child.
What do you mean by that jacket?
Just a terminology used in Jamaica to say the child was not the father's real child. Like it was
so this was the man's real child?
Real child.
So it was a real child.
The man
of
had
this
not
couple.
been unfaithful, it was the man's real child.
And the man looked like me.
Man looked like you.
And the wife looked like you.
Looked like you too.
And she came with that blonde child.
And they had other children that looked like them. Then they had a blonde, blue-haired. And all the geneticists studied and said, okay, this child is really the man's child. But it came back, that was a phenotype. That was a phenotype of the child. But you couldn't look at that phenotype and impute or say that the genotype, what the genotype is.
And we will tell you the reason why that is.
So we can look at the videos
so let's take a look
explain
because,
dominant and recessive.
That's right.
And genotype and phenotype.
But we are talking and you may not understand what we talk, but the
graphics
eyes
will help.
So let's take a look at that.
Thanks for stopping by. Today we're talking about dominant alleles versus recessive alleles. If you don't quite remember what an allele is, watch my video on genes versus alleles, linked in the description below. All right. Every organism has at least 2 alleles for every gene. 2 alleles for eye color, 2 alleles for horn size, etc. Right? 2 alleles for every trait that it has. In the simplest scenario, these alleles have a dominant and recessive relationship, which means that one form of the allele, the dominant allele, is expressed over the other form, the recessive. Right, we often show this relationship using the alphabet. So uppercase letters refer to a dominant allele, while lowercase letters refer to the recessive allele. So let's look at an example. Let's say cat fur color can be orange or gray. Orange being dominant and gray being recessive. The first thing we want to do is select a letter to represent the alleles. The letter you choose is not important so long as you can distinguish between the uppercase and the lowercase form of that letter. All right, so let's choose the letter F since we're dealing with fur color. So in this example, the big F or the capital F would be dominant or orange, and the lowercase f would be gray or recessive. And there are 3 different pairings of these 2 alleles. Right? You could have 2 dominant alleles, a big F and a big F, in which case the fur is orange, or you could have 2 recessive alleles, a little f and a little f, in which case the fur is gray, or you could have one of each, a big F and a little f. The order doesn't matter here when there's one of each. In this last case, the fur would be orange because the dominant trait is always expressed over the recessive in this type. And that's it for dominant versus recessive alleles. Thanks for stopping by. Today we're going to talk about genotypes versus phenotypes. So when you have a trait, that is a pair of alleles, such as big B, or little b, we can refer to them in 2 different ways. The first is the genotype, which refers to the exact pairing of the alleles. For example, if we're dealing with eye color and there are 2 alleles, a big B for blue eyes and a little b for green eyes, then there are 3 possible genotypes. Big B, little b, or little b. Right? So these are the genotypes. These are the possible pairing of the alleles. The genotype isn't concerned with the expression of the trait, only the pairing of the alleles. Okay. The other way to refer to a trait is by the phenotype, which is its expression. So using our previous example of eye color, there are only 2 phenotypes, blue eyes or green eyes. Right? The phenotype isn't concerned with the pairing of the alleles. Right? The genotypes big B, and big B, little b both give the same phenotype, blue eyes. Okay, so the phenotype is just the expression. All right, so to recap, the genotype refers to the pair of alleles for a trait, in this case, the specific letters, and the phenotype refers to the expression of that trait, right? How it looks or how it functions, the expression, okay? And that's it. So I know this can be a confusing concept, so hopefully that helps. And if you have any additional questions, please throw them in the comments. I'll see what I can do to help you out. All right, check out some of my other videos on this and other topics, and subscribe to keep up with my new videos. I'll catch you next time.
So having explained Biology 101 of genes and alleles, recessive and dominant.
They are now
phenotype and
experts. They
phenotype.
understand exactly
Yes,
what
our
gene.
audience
Yeah.
has reached a high level of understanding
Expertise.
of genetics.
Yeah.
Right. We can now go on to the substance, one of the substantial videos of our presentation, which is talking about the genetic inheritance now of skin color. So we have talked about genes, we've talked about alleles, we've talked about dominant and recessive, phenotype and genotype.
Yeah.
So skin color is a phenotype. It's not a genotype.
And when you see me, the first thing you see, I am a black man.
Yeah, but that's a phenotype.
Right.
But we spoke about that.
Right.
Skin color is a phenotype.
But it is the basis of a lot of issues in the world.
Troubles from Moses' time, eh?
Yeah.
So
that is what era that Miriam got leprosy for.
And had to be isolated. So skin color, which is a phenotype, we are now going to look at the genetic input into that phenotype. What is the genotype that matches up with that phenotype? Right, yeah. That's what we're going to be looking at.
And the video we be presenting to you is a video by, let's get it right, Dr. Kathy Gallucci, who is Associate Professor of Biology at Elon University. And she started the video with with the hook in the video is a very interesting story which was written in 1893 by a lady by the name of Kate Chopin. Chopin, by the way, is spelled Chopin, but I think it's pronounced Chopin. Is that correct? As a French speaker. And you want to tell them what the story is about?
Well, the story is called Desiree's Baby.
Desiree's Baby, yeah.
And it's a short story by this writer, as you said, published in the 1890s.
In Vogue in 1893.
And it was talking about Louisiana in the period before the war.
Civil War.
Before the Civil War in Louisiana. And Desiree was an adopted daughter of Monsieur and Madame Valmondé.
Valmondé, yeah, okay.
And they were wealthy French Creoles. They were white people.
White people.
In Louisiana.
They were at the top of the top.
Top of the top before the war.
They were the people at the top of the society.
You could say that,
yeah.
Okay?
Whites. In America, they had slaves, I presume, and so on and so forth.
And so Desiree was abandoned as a baby, and then the gentleman, Monsieur Valmondé, found her near a stone by the gateway.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
By this gateway, and they adopted her and raised her.
Yeah.
Very good of them, I must say.
Yeah.
Then, when she got older now, the son of another wealthy and respected white family, French Creole family, Armand was the son. Armand met her and liked her, and they married and they had a child. Nice story so far, right?
Yes, yeah, it's all good.
But then people see the baby of Desiree and Armand, and they say, something is funny here. This baby too dark.
I think the word they use is a quadroon.
The baby looked like it was a quarter black.
Quarter black, quadroon. So you have these two
white people,
the creme de la creme,
yes.
The people at the top of the top in that society, and they marry each other and the baby. Black baby. And remember, in those days, we didn't have genetics to go and say who the father was.
Right.
So you can imagine.
So the neighbors looked at the baby's phenotype.
Yeah.
We talked about that. The phenotype of Desiree was white, and the phenotype of Armand, her husband, was white too.
Yeah.
But the phenotype of the baby was quarter black.
Quadroon.
Quadroon.
I hope I pronounce it right.
Quadroon, that's correct. So they cause a little bit of a problem, right?
A wee bit of a problem or a big problem?
Well, a wee bit, I'd say. But anyway, because Desiree's parents were unknown now, remember Desiree was found at the gate.
Yeah.
She was abandoned. So because her parents were not known, Armand immediately assumes that Desiree has black in her family.
Yeah.
Because she didn't know her parents.
Yeah.
Desiree said, no, I don't have any black in my family. But Armand did not believe her. At any rate, she writes her mother, her adopted mother, and says, look, I really am in a desperate situation here. So the mother says, look, come home. You know, if he doesn't want you because you have a quadroon baby, come home. So Desiree rejected, starts off to go home, but she never gets there.
Well, for whatever reason, she probably killed herself. She took the child. She took her baby, and she took herself, of course,
and they never
into the bayou, as they call it in those places in Louisiana, and she was never seen again. So we assume that she died or
was killed,
or maybe she just took up another identity somewhere. We don't know. But
anyway, Desiree disappears. Armand now, in his rage at Desiree's bringing blackness into his family, burns all of her belongings, including the baby's cradle, everything.
Yeah.
Even the letters that she had sent him when they were courting,
Yeah.
he burns all of these as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
In the process of burning everything that belonged to Desiree, even distantly, Armand finds a letter. The letter is from his mother.
His own mother.
His own mother,
Yes.
his father. And the letter says Armand is part black.
So he was the source of the gene.
He was the source of it.
Although he didn't look that way and could not have known,
Yeah.
he was the source
That
of the
his
gene.
mother's ancestry has black in it.
To be fair, it could have also been Desiree too, but we don't know because there is no conclusion on what her genotype was. But certainly,
Point of the story was.
Point
of the story was.
Yeah.
He who was so angry at Desiree for having black in her.
Yeah.
Whatever else may happen. He was so angry at her for having black in her. Yeah. But he burned everything related to her. Yeah. He had 25% black in him.
Yeah.
And so
you can't always tell, and that's the thing about it. So so whatever Adam and Eve looked like, what they could produce would depend on what their genotype was.
Right. So the brief story, raised some important issues that plagued the South then, because the South was hooked on phenotype.
It probably still plagues it now.
Still plagues it now, as we can see from recent events in America, right?
Yeah.
So the South was hooked on phenotype.
Yeah.
The whole story of who is black and who is white.
That's right. And in fact, that society had a lot of different shades of color, because all societies tend eventually to have that.
Yeah, because as even nowadays, some people in Jamaica are regarded as white people.
Yeah.
If they go to America, they're called African American or something like that, much to their dismay. So that still continues. So anyway, so that was the story of Desiree's baby.
So this associate professor from the University of Elon is analyzing
skin
color from the point of view of genetics. What determines it.
Yes.
So the first thing she said, well, look, and we will be showing you the video, but we're just giving you a little prep on the video. She said, look, if skin color were due to a recessive and a dominant gene,
one single one,
just one gene, recessive and dominant, you would just have black people and white people.
That's it.
Nothing in between. All right? If it were due to there is another consideration called incomplete dominance, where you have a kind of a partial dominance, then you would have either blacks, white, and you could have shade in between. But the fact is, when you look at human populations, a guy by the name of his name is Kim Bryan, I think it is Kim Bryan, produced a work of art which consists of a rectangle with the shades of colors of human colors in it.
He had looked at people.
That he had looked at people he had met. And he had met people with over 275 different shades
of skin.
And so if you have a trait that can manifest like that, where you can have not black or white or one thing in between, but 275, then clearly such a trait is not determined by genes that are dominant and recessive, but rather the trait is known as polygenic.
Many different genes.
Many different genes.
And that's the only way you can have such a variety of shades.
So in the video that we'll be showing you in a short while, this professor from the university, Galucci, she does an analysis of skin color, making the assumption that
there are three
genes. Of course, if there are 3 genes, you can get a certain number of shades in between.
You can have 64.
A combination of 64, which can give you 7 shades.
Yeah.
But human beings, we know, have at least 275 shades.
So if there are 3 genes, you can get 64 different genotypes.
Genotypes
from the combination. But those 64 genotypes will give you 7 phenotypes.
7 phenotypes.
Right.
So with 3 genes, you have 7 phenotypes.
Right.
So if you have 275
phenotypes,
how many genotypes you have?
Lots.
It tells you why Adam and Eve can produce so many different shades, because it's a polygenic trait. Okay.
Polygenic, and there are many more than 3.
And there are many more than 3. But let us look at the analysis of
genetic inheritance of skin color. Yeah, let's have a look at that.
We introduced the topic of evolution by asking the question, how is human skin color inherited? Consider the skin pigmentation of biracial individuals. Can these phenotypes be interpreted as a simple example of dominance? Do you think that dark pigmentation is due to a dominant allele or a recessive allele? So think about it. Each of these celebrities is lighter than one of their parents. Do you think light skin could be dominant? And consider the case of a family with two sons, one dark-skinned and one light-skinned. Both parents are biracial, yet one of their sons has a very different skin tone than either of their parents or their brother. In the story of Desiree's baby, the son of Desiree and Armand had darker skin than either of the parents. Since both Desiree and Armand are light-skinned, again as in the celebrity photos we saw before, can we consider the light-skinned allele to be dominant? Before we decide on what genotype determines light skin color based on anecdotal evidence, let's think about a much larger sample size. This well-known work of art by Byron Kim shows the diversity of human skin color tones. Each panel is 10 inches by 8 inches, and the painting fills an entire wall. The colors on the panel represent 275 different skin tones. These are people that Kim met. The title of his painting, Synecdoche, means a part standing for the whole. So here the panels represent skin tones of mankind. You can visit the link on this slide to hear the artist's own words about this painting. If skin color is expressed by a dominant allele in a single gene pair, we would not observe such a diversity of skin color variations. The only skin colors observed would be dark and light. And if skin color was a case of incomplete dominance, we would observe only 3 skin tones, light, dark, and medium. What other possibility is there? The trait must be polygenic, a trait determined by more than one gene. To get the variety of skin tones as seen in the painting, there must be several genes for skin color, but we will limit it to 3 genes, A, B, and C. Remember, each gene has 2 alleles or alternate forms. A dominant allele, uppercase A, B, or C, and a recessive allele, lowercase a, B, and C, coding for light skin. The genotypes for each can be homozygous dominant, represented here by uppercase letters AA, BB, CC, heterozygous as in AA, BB, and CC, or homozygous recessive as represented by 2 small a's, 2 small b's, and 2 small c's. Here are 3 possible genotypes that could be inherited. The individuals with the darkest skin would all have dominant alleles. Individuals with intermediate skin would have a combination of dominant and recessive alleles. And those with very light skin would have all recessive alleles. Remember, each individual in this example would have 3 genes, each with 2 alleles. Diploid means 2 of each gene.
Right, so Professor Gallucci was talking about the genetic basis of skin color.
Yeah.
Skin color is a hugely important thing in most places in the world.
Yeah.
In Jamaica, we know skin color is important.
Mm-hmm.
There are some families where if the boy meets a girl and the girl is too dark, the mother especially will say, no way you're going to marry that girl. She's too dark.
Yeah.
That's so? You know that, eh?
It's the reality.
Nobody ever says she's too light.
No.
I've never heard of anybody saying that, but certainly we know that some people, even people we know, have had that problem where the parents say, no way you're not going to marry that girl. She's too dark, or that man, he's too dark. And we know that even before in Jamaica, people were hired for working in the banks and so on by virtue of their skin color.
In Trinidad too, I'm a Trinidad.
And if you were too dark, the banks would not hire you.
Don't want any black people up front.
Want people too black. to be working in the banks. This is, I mean, it's a painful truth, but it's the truth, right?
Yeah, I mean that people are bleaching their skin because of the that's why people are bleaching their skin.
Lest we think it's a Caribbean phenomenon or a Jamaican phenomenon, it is certainly not. Because I was in Cameroon in Africa some years ago, and I was amazed to see how much bleaching was being done by the women there, who were so beautiful, and yet they were bleaching. And so this idea of
Asians bleach their skin
Asians
too.
also bleach.
Asians
Oh
bleach their
yes,
skin too.
definitely.
Yeah.
So the skin color thing is hugely important, you know.
Yeah.
And in India, we know that the very dark Indians are totally looked down on.
Yeah.
And a boy who is light skinned in India, he dare not go and take up some dark.
No.
That's unless she's hugely wealthy.
In fact, there was a movie some years ago where that was actually said straight on the front. I can't remember the name of the movie.
We were watching. It was a kind of series, like a soap opera, right? And the lady was saying, you could be dark and have lots of money. You could marry Harry.
You could marry Harry, yes. But
to be dark and have no money, you cannot marry Harry.
That was actually said.
That was actually said. And we know in Jamaica it's the same thing, right? People don't want people too dark to marry their children because they don't want their grandchildren to come out too dark. So skin color is a huge thing. And then at the beginning of this video, Professor Gallucci showed some persons who were all biracial.
Yes,
it included Barack Obama,
President Obama,
and some others,
The Rock,
and you know Mariah Carey,
and Mariah Carey,
who's very
fair. They're all biracial.
Well, we don't know if she's bleaching it, but anyway,
but
she's very fair. I'm just saying that. Excuse me for Mariah, she's not bleaching, but I'm just saying, okay, she's very fair, right? So those biracial persons had a range of skin colors.
They're all biracial.
They were all biracial.
From white, one parent white and the other parent dark.
Exactly. And so she was saying that these were the phenotypes that these biracial persons represented.
Absolutely.
But you could not tell from looking at it what their genotypes were.
No. Yeah.
And then she went into the palette of skin colors And she even showed the two black people who had the white child.
Yes, these are the people from Nigeria who had but they actually were biracial, but they looked quite dark actually.
Quite dark,
because they were biracial, they came from the dark. Yeah. They were very dark biracial.
And their child was white. So, and then, she goes through the whole thing that we have talked about genes and alleles and so on, and inheritance. And what the point she made at the end is that two mixed persons, two biracial persons who marry, their children have a range of shades, from very, very pale, very, very dark, right? But the phenotype that they will most likely have is the one their parents have.
Absolutely.
But they could have anything along the extreme.
And like we said, she in the analysis used
only three
alleles.
And she got 64 possible combinations.
64 possible combinations.
Which gave you 7 different phenotypes.
So to get the 275 that was displayed in that art.
A lot more genes.
I mean, there are a lot more genes, a lot more combinations,
a lot
more possibilities, a lot more phenotype. So it means that people with a particular phenotype are walking around with all sorts of different genes in them. Yes. And when they produce children with people with other phenotypes, the possibilities...
Children can look like neither of them from either extreme.
You always get this bell curve, which is the statistical normal distribution. It's the way it looks, ladies and gentlemen. It goes like that. That's what we call the bell curve. And in the sample...
peak one will be the most common one.
The most common one. So most commonly, you will have...
You will look like your parents.
You will look like your parents, by far. But there is going to be occasionally the upper end where you look darker than your parents.
Or much paler. So this is a fallacy then of looking at people and assuming infidelity on the part of the mother.
Yes.
You can't do that. This is why the court does not regard in any way the appearance of a child when it's considering paternity. The court does not look at that at all, because you can't tell paternity.
Well, I had experienced that live and direct. I know a lady, and when she had her child, because her husband was very dark, he was darker than I am, and the child was very, very fair. And the rumor was that the child was not the father's child. And the father was a man who loved the child and would walk with him through the street, and people would laugh at him and say, it's not his child and so on. But however, as the child got older, You can see the similarities between him and the farming skin color.
Right, but the lesson is that your skin color, two people can have the same skin color but have wholly different genes.
Different genes, and that's the takeaway point.
Genotype versus phenotype.
Yeah.
You must not look at the phenotype of people's children and assume anything untoward about the mother.
Yeah.
Because the phenotype does not tell you what the genotype
is.
And skin color is not inherited by a black gene or a white gene. There is no such thing as a black gene or a white gene. Yeah. There are many, maybe hundreds, we don't know. There are many genes that control skin color. And so the variety can be quite you know, St. Paul said in 17, Acts 17, he said, God has made from one blood men of all races.
The Bible, I keep telling people, the fact that people don't understand why the Bible is true doesn't mean that it's not true. So people looked and see there are so many different colors. How could everybody come from one man and one woman? Because we didn't understand that the skin color is a polygenic trait which is inherited by a whole range of genes. Right. And if you can
they can be expressed in any combination.
That's right. You can mix up and blend all those genes. And if people get into isolated population, then certain genes after a while become dominant. But it doesn't mean that they didn't come from the same original source.
Exactly.
So the Bible is right again.
God has made from one blood men of all races. That's what Paul said.
Now, I just want to do a little business, take care of business here in that the beginning of this video, Professor Gallucci speaks in our discussion about evolution.
Yes,
she has to say that because if you're in a university and you don't say evolution is the cause of everything pertaining to life, her career is over, would be over.
Right.
So I'm not saying she doesn't believe in it. Maybe she does believe in evolution, but I'm saying that she had better say that.
Maybe she hasn't indoctrinated in it anyway.
But I would ask Dr. Gallucci 2 questions to give us the scientific proof for any instance in which a new organ was produced by a process that was totally natural without the input of an intellectual. She can cite none. Nobody in evolution can cite any of one. All right. The other question is because living organisms like us, we have organs. All right. By the way, your organ is an app. That's another thing we must think about. There's a liver app and a kidney app and a brain app. That's why they turn out to be different. But we'll talk about that at another time. Just this. For evolution to be true, it must produce organs, new organs. So you must have evidence that it can produce a new organ from some natural process. There is no evidence of that. Similarly, for evolution to be true, you must be able to produce a new body plan. You see, my body plan is I have right and left hands. And I have right and left foot. That's my body plan, our body plan. Snails don't have fingers and toes. Snails have a different body plan. We must have evidence that different body plans can arise from natural processes. There is zero evidence for those two. So evolution has never been proved. But where are we now? A little diversion.
Yes, that's a little diversion because having established the difference between phenotype and genotype, as Professor Gallucci did quite well despite her beginning and studying about evolution. Everything else she said subsequent to that was quite useful in talking about genotype and phenotype when it comes to skin color. Then
but this thing caused problems because America right up to now
was burning because of this
issue.
Right, it was burning. There's a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues outstanding in America and in other countries too on the issue of skin color.
So George Floyd was
all of that
was killed by a
man of a different
phenotype. And America was burning because of that. But race is really a political and economic construct, and
it's not real.
It's not real.
So we've talked on this show already about false constructs. There are some people who in the gender studies in the university who say gender is a construct. Gender is not a construct. You are male or you are female. XX or XY.
That's right.
Male body parts, female
different
body parts.
Anatomy.
That is not a construct. Okay. But race is a construct.
Yeah, because we are all human beings with different shades.
Phenotypes, right?
Different phenotypes.
And the race is really not real, which is the subject of the last video we're going to show.
And race had a whole lot of politics involved in it.
Race is, matter of fact, I would say 90% of race is politics.
It's politics.
And the other 10 is economics.
So let's take a look
politics and economics is what make up race. Because people have used phenotypic differences between groups to get their politics in place and to get their economics in place. To get one group to work for you without paying them, i.e. slavery, you conveniently find a group that looks that way. But chances are the difference between the genotype between the slave and the slave owner probably was very minuscule.
Well, you may have more similarity between a slave and a slave owner than between two slaves.
Slave owners, or two slave owners.
That's right.
Based on what we have seen.
That's
so
right.
I'm saying most of race, as we call it, is politics and economics.
So let's
look at it. Race is not real. Race is a construct. So let's look at that video. Race is a construct.
You may think you know exactly what race you are, but how would you prove it if someone disagreed with you? The fact is, even though race drives a lot of social and political outcomes, race isn't real. One of the first people to attempt to categorize humans according to race was a German scientist around 1776. He came up with 5 different groups according to physical appearance and geographic origin of their ancestors. Americans of European descent eagerly bought into this type of thinking around the same time. Some historians have said the idea that there were different races helped them resolve the contradiction between a natural right to freedom and the fact of slavery. If whites were their own distinct category, then they could feel a lot better about denying freedom to people who they labeled black and decided were fundamentally different. But as political priorities change, definitions of race in America adjust right along with them. For example, if you were of Mexican birth or ancestry in the United States in 1929, you were considered white. Then the 1930 census changed that to non-white to limit immigration. Later, when the US needed to increase its labor force during World War II, these people were switched back to white. And what it took to be black once varied so wildly throughout the country, from 1/4 to 1/16 to the infamous 1 drop of African ancestry, that people could actually change races just by crossing state lines. Then suddenly in 2000, the government decided that Americans could be more than one race and added a multiracial category to the census. This has left many Americans scratching their heads when it comes to selecting who they are. As many as 6.2% of census respondents selected some other race in a 2010 survey. The idea that someone might look one way and identify another way, or that they might be really hard to place in a racial category, is not new. This is why there was a public debate about whether MSNBC's Karen Finney could say she was black, or how we can't even agree on the racial label assigned to the President of the United States. Of course, many people feel their racial identity is very clear and very permanent, but the fact that some people have changed theirs and that no one can really argue with them shows how shaky the very idea of race is. This is all because there isn't a race chromosome in our DNA that people can point to. It simply doesn't exist. When the medical community links race to health outcomes, it's really just using race as a substitute for other factors, such as where your ancestors came from, or the experiences of people who may have been put in the same racial group as you. Dorothy Roberts explains that sickle cell anemia is a prime example of this. The disease is linked to areas with high rates of malaria, which include some parts of Europe and Asia in addition to Africa. It's not actually about race at all. This, of course, does not mean that the concept of race isn't hugely important in our lives. The racial categories to which we're assigned can determine real-life experiences, they can drive political outcomes, and they can even make the difference between life and death. But understanding that racial categories are made up can give us an important perspective on where racism came from in the first place.
Well, I thought that was a particularly interesting video. It is interesting that the Mexicans moved from in 1929 from being white to when the census was done for immigration purposes by the 1930s, they were non-white. Probably they didn't want too many of them to come into
absolutely. You want to restrict them.
And then as the war economy needed more workers, the Mexicans were once again white. But by the way, who were making them white and who were making them non-white?
White people.
The people with the power. So yes, the people with the power. And in fact, it's interesting that some of those states, after a while, they started to determine who is white and who is black by your percentage of genetic.
The criteria varied widely. Yeah. For example, I believe that in the more northern states, you could have more black and still be white.
More black and still be white.
So if you like in the more northern states, they'd say if you are more than a quarter black, then you're black. Yeah. But if you're up to 25%, you could be called white, right? But then they would say, some would say if you have 1/8, you could be. But in the more southern states, I figure,
So
if you have one drop
in fact,
of black blood.
The white supremacists nowadays, apparently are doing a lot of, this ancestry business.
Yeah, and 23andMe, the DNA testing, because they want to see if anybody has one drop.
Well, first of all,
of so-called black blood. We know there's no such thing.
Yeah. But it's the thing, there is no race chromosome. There is no chromosome. There is no genetic thing
that's no black gene.
There
is no black gene and there is no white gene.
Yeah,
that's a fallacy.
Yeah. So that's the thing. There's no such thing. But you have these combinations which can produce different phenotypes.
Lots of different.
And again, we just want to make the point that's why the Bible is once again right. Not only is there no evidence that you could produce a new organ by a natural process without an intellect, in other words, that aspect of evolution is not true. Not only can you not produce there's no scientifically verified proof that you could produce a new body plan without the input of an intellect in terms of the genetic material, because the gene really is code. There's no evidence of that. There is also no evidence for a chromosome or some specific genetic marker that makes anybody a particular race. We are all human beings who have lots of different alleles.
From one blood, God has created the alleles necessary to make
all of us. And depending on the alleles you have, you may have a particular expression, but the point is made within you, even though you have that phenotypic expression,
different genes.
You may have different genes.
Yeah, because we know there's something called a throwback child.
That's right.
Throwback child is where two dark parents might have a very fair child and bring the mother's reputation into question. But the fact is that she has genes from way back that would cause that. So the bottom line we're saying is that phenotype and genotype are totally different, and at any rate, there is no such thing as a black or a white gene.
Right.
There are many genes that control the amount of melanin in your skin.
Yeah.
And because there are many alleles of many genes,
there are many
phenotypes and genotypes that you can inherit. And that results in what we see as skin color.
That's right.
And so this kind of brings us to where we are now. All that is going on with Black Lives Matter. Some say white lives matter. I just say life matters.
Life matters.
Life matters.
And it's important, because we have to frame our discussion as the Bible would frame it.
Absolutely.
Because in order to get the right solution, we have to get the biblical solution.
And you have to think right. Or if you're wrong thinking can never lead to the right solution.
That's right.
If you think wrongly for 100 million years, you will never get to the right solution.
That's right.
If you employ wrong
thinking. Absolutely. So we are showing you the biblical thoughts and the science lines up with the Bible.
Absolutely.
Science lines up with the Bible. That there is only human beings.
Always will.
They're always human beings with different
alleles. And so different phenotypes.
So where do we go from here?
So today we have given you good information about genes and alleles, dominant and recessive alleles, and your genotype, which is the composition of your genes and alleles, versus your phenotype, what you look like. We have shown you that the inheritance of skin color is a complex thing. Yeah. Very, very complex.
Yeah. That's why there's so many shades.
That's why there's so many shades.
In fact, interestingly, human beings are the most diverse organisms on the planet.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in terms of height, size, color, all that thing. Yeah. God, he put a lot into human beings.
Put a lot of different alleles that will give you a lot of variety.
Yeah.
From one man. Okay, so we show you the genetic inheritance of skin color, the phenotype of skin color, very, very complex thing.
Yeah.
Must not assume anything about paternity from the way someone looks. Yeah. And then we show you that race really is a construct.
And a really useful political construct if you want to make a lot of money.
Political construct, because people have used it to divide and rule for years and years and years. They have used, even between black people.
Oh, yeah.
They will say, the Browning. You need to make a thing named the Brownings. The Brownings.
And Bush Banton say that he loves his Browning.
Loves his Browning, right? I don't like the term at all. It offends me deeply. But anyway, so you have the brown people, and then you have the black people, and all of this, and so there's a scale of color.
Yeah.
Even today in Jamaica and many other countries, there's a scale of color that we use to divide and conquer and suppress and rule over each other. And so, as we said, race is not real.
But people use it, eh?
People use it in order to do harm to other people.
Want to remember what God did to Miriam when she
dared to come in and talk about race of Moses' wife. God said, this is it. You don't trouble him. You marry black people, his business. And you know, throughout the Bible, people have a way of saying God is xenophobic. He's not xenophobic at all. No. He deals with behavior. If your worldview lines up with God's worldview, it's fine. Yeah. And if it doesn't, it's not. So we have shown you today the real story about race. About race. The real story color, of race.
That we are all one.
Of the human race.
Human being.
And it is because man is fallen. Why fallen man uses the phenotype of skin color and the imaginary thing of race to suppress or to do harm or to divide and so on. Only because of the fallen man.
Well, God obviously liked the different colors. That's why he made it that way. So guess what? You might like it, but God loves it. That's why he made it that way specifically. So check us out next time. We'll be looking at how people deal with shades of colors and heights and so on. In different cultures.
But remember, it is fallen man that makes an issue of race. Because there is really no such thing as race.
This has been the Issachar Hour. My name is Wayne.
I'm Doreen West. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah. Thank you for your feedback that you've been getting of any kind. We appreciate it. Any topics you'd like us to address, please send us your feedback. We appreciate it so much.
Pray for the ministry. Let's pray for Brother Hanson and his work in this ministry and MTM TV for the success of the ministry.
Thank you for being with us. See you next time on Issachar Hour.